Douglas has been working in the Far East for nearly a decade, and so is very familiar with the region. Shanghai is some way ahead of us in the UK on the COVID curve of recovery. So I thought it'd be interesting and very useful to speak to Douglas about how people are getting back to work there. So Douglas, can I start by asking you to tell us about the impact COVID-19 has had on the way you get to work and the way the office operates?
As you probably know, this all started for us in late January, and kind of late January, beginning of February is when the lockdown started to happen. As we slowly came back to work, and it was kind of a slow migration process. The government would say, okay, businesses can open now, and especially our Gensler office in Shanghai and also in Beijing. We started with allowing 30% of the staff to come back. And then the following week, this is about mid-March at this point, about 50% of the staff to come back. And then by the end of March, I think we were 100% staff. But that is to say that if anyone was traveling or they were coming back from traveling, they did have to do a 14-day quarantine. And then, you know, if people were traveling for business trips, they would have to quarantine as well, just to kind of add another layer of safety onto that. But as far as the journey to work, you know, some things, taxis, for example, were very easy to get. The metros were empty. There was still kind of a slow process for people coming back into Shanghai. As you know, it was the Chinese New Year, so there were a lot of people that left for the holiday. So that took about 2 months just for people to kind of, for the city to sort of fill back up again. Going to work, you'd arrive at the office building, and they have thermal image cameras now that you'd walk through the door, and the infrared cameras are taking your temperature. And so if your temperature is too high, or if you're carrying a hot coffee, which could happen as well, it'll set off a little bit of an alarm. And the guard would stop you and just kind of manually check you as well to see if you have a temperature. And if you did, they wouldn't allow you into the building. But most people at this point, that's not really happening, I think. And so after you'd go through that layer of security, and this is right at the door of the building offices. This is most, I would say probably all office buildings here in Shanghai and Beijing, and probably most cities here in China. After you go through that layer, there's a second layer, which is you have to show the security officer your QR code. And everyone has a digital QR code that's either green, yellow, or red. And it has your name on it, it has your city, and it's through an app that we all use here in China. It's the same app that we use for communicating and chatting. It's an app we use for buying things, digital payment, and it is a form of a tracking system, but it really just tracks sort of which cities you've been to, and if you have been to a high-risk area, your QR code would very likely turn to yellow. If you've been tested positive for the COVID and you're very likely showing symptoms, you'd probably have a red QR code, and you'd probably be in the hospital. So you would need to prove that your code is green, and then you're allowed into the building, and you can go up to the office. So at Gensler, what we've done is we've actually added additional layers of kind of health safety within our office, not because it's necessarily been mandated by the government. There are mandates that have been put into place, but we've sort of taken a step further. We are asking all of the staff to wear masks in the office. So pretty much everyone is doing that, especially if you're in meetings or you're working closely with other people. Everyone's got their mask on, and there's hand sanitizers everywhere, bottles of it. Every meeting room, every sort of communal table got a bottle of hand sanitizer. So it's there, and it just kind of it just, you know, it's very convenient to just kind of use some disinfection on your hands and wipe down some surfaces. So these are some additional things that we've done in our office. We've controlled large meetings, large groups. People are in many cases sort of sitting every other chair in a meeting room. There's no international travel happening right now, so it's all domestic, and even that's being controlled.
And you get quite clear instructions from government about what you can and can't do.
About a month ago, it was a lot more strict. Now, beginning of May, it is, we are seeing things get a bit more relaxed. There's very low cases, at least that's what's being reported, of sort of the COVID-19 positive cases. Most of the cases that are getting reported are at the airports. So those people are quarantined immediately and they're not coming into the cities. There are still some, so the risk is fairly low. It's fairly controlled. So yeah, people are able to come into the office and work, and the guidelines that were given from the government is just to be cautious. There's signs everywhere: washing your hands, wear the mask if you're in any kind of like grouped area, and they do have temperature checks basically everywhere now at any kind of cafe, restaurant, bar, building lobby, at the metro. There are signs in the taxi cabs that ask passengers to wear their masks.
And with restaurants, is there social distancing required in restaurants?
As restaurants started to open back up, they did do sort of the every other table kind of seating arrangements, but that has relaxed a bit by now. So restaurants are operating normally at this point. All of the seats are being used just as normal. The only difference is that at the door there is still a temperature check and kind of a sign-in form. You write your name, your phone number, and you write your temperature. So that at least there's a tracking that's happening for everybody.
So what sort of advice would you give to office managers and users in the UK about preparing to go back to work?
The expectations are going to change from people coming back to work, how sanitary the surfaces are. So from an office manager point of view, and this is a big thing that's happening right now, is how do offices operate differently? And one of the things is cleaning arrangements. So if you either had in-house cleaning staff or you outsourced to a contract cleaning company that would come maybe every evening previously and vacuum and wipe things down, those contracts may need to be upgraded. The cleaning crew that comes in may need more staff because the expectations will be higher, so that every desk, every computer monitor, every phone gets wiped down and sanitized on a daily basis. So these expectations will be in place. So that's going to ask a bit more of office managers to control that, especially in the past, I would say better part of the past decade, the move in workplaces have gone more towards a shared office environment. So this is a big topic that's been talked about for a number of years already. And a lot of businesses have already moved in that direction of having shared spaces. So unassigned desks, for example, where you can come in and choose where you work. And this is going to ask a bit more as people come back to work, and they keep that culture of having unassigned desks, and it just means there's more shared spaces and more shared surfaces and furniture that's shared. Then it's going to require a higher degree of cleaning and sanitation. That is one thing that office managers are going to have to look for and be aware of. Another thing that I think is going to be quite interesting is our comfort now with virtual meetings. And as we've done the work from home for about 2 months now, and now we're kind of back to the office. And what we're seeing is a lot of our meetings are hybrid between the virtual and the physical. People have a choice now. So every meeting that gets scheduled also has a dial-in link. So whether it's Zoom or Skype or Teams or Lark or whatever the app may be, a lot of staff are given the option. They could even sit at their desk and call in, where other staff members go to the meeting room down the hall and sit there. So this may change how people do meetings and sort of a flexible work environment. For example, if you're allowed to do your meetings virtually, and that comfort is now being built into our behavior and sort of our habits. So as we come back to work, do we maintain that same level of comfort and say, well, could I take my morning conference call at home and come into the office a little bit later? And that's something that office managers or potentially HR policies will have to think about. If people actually do have the autonomy to have a flexible schedule, if I can do my virtual meeting, can I leave work early and do my virtual meetings in the evening? I don't have to physically be in the office. So policies may have to change, in how especially for more traditional businesses. Probably the more progressive businesses may already have adapted to this, but this is something that we may see some change in.
Looking at what is happening at the moment in Shanghai, what sort of lessons does that have, do you think, for cities generally? As far as we hear, lots of people are coming into work. There's a big increase in car usage, whereas here there's a lot of talk about how can we get more people walking and cycling. What are the changes you're seeing happening in Shanghai?
That was happening in the beginning, that people didn't want to take mass transit. There was a concern there. So more people were driving. And, I think that's sort of loosened, relaxed a little bit. I would say the traffic is fairly back to normal here in the cities. But what I hope comes from this is a stronger sense of community, especially as more and more people are migrating to cities. And this is something that, we've been researching for a number of years at Gensler, looking at how, patterns of urban density and more people from countrysides, especially in Asia. This is really, really apparent in Asia and in China, that people are leaving the countryside areas and migrating towards the cities, which is more density, a lot more people. So that is going to force a higher sense of community, and whether it's health safety or whether it's a resilience towards sustainable behaviors, and how we do things and look at conservation. I hope that's an outcome. I think that could be a quite positive outcome of all of this. This is certainly something that's unifying us globally. We're all going through it, and it's something that you can all talk about. And even with the sort of physical distancing, I think it's actually bringing people closer together. So what I think we can learn here in cities is that we do have to kind of look out for each other. During the early months of this here in Shanghai, and I can tell you from my personal experiences that everyone started wearing masks. This is something that was already part of the culture in Asia. If you felt sick, you'd wear a mask, and it wasn't strange to see people doing that. And there's a history of previous outbreaks, especially here in China. So there is a bit of a sensitivity to that. And I would say that community looking out for each other kind of awareness is definitely a strong cultural aspect here in Shanghai and Beijing, where our offices are, but I think most cities in China experience this as well. So people do look out for each other. If you're not wearing your mask, someone's probably going to say something to you, and you'll be the weird one if you're walking around without your mask on, and people will sort of give you a look and shame you a little bit and say, no, we've got to look out for each other here, and this is a very real thing. Right now, it's a disruption in business and our lives in the form of a pandemic. In a few years, it may be a natural disaster. It may be a financial crisis. It may be any number of things that sort of disrupt the way we live, and we'll have to realize that we will have to change. So, Peter, your question was how come, what are some lessons that we can learn from cities here? The other one that just came to my mind was the ability to adapt and to change, especially. And here in Shanghai, so I've lived here about 10 years, and one of the things I've noticed is that change happens so fast here, and it could be immediate, it can be overnight, whether we're talking about government policies, new laws going into place, and they just get enforced immediately. There's no kind of grace period. It's like the next day, this is the new law, and you have to go with it. Or whether you're talking about building construction, within a year there's a new skyscraper, or whether you're talking about technology, you know, people adapting to technology is really, really fast here. So this is quite often, it's a very positive impact that we've seen here. You know, the idea of digital payments, for example. You know, we don't use cash. I can't remember last time I went to an ATM was maybe 2 years ago. We just don't really use cash here anymore. So everything's digital, everything's easier, and these things have come about really, really fast. So that the ability to adapt to change. So when a pandemic happens like this, and you have to instantly change your behaviors, people kind of like, okay, this is what we got to do now, and they don't really freak out. They don't really protest. They're like, okay, well, this is now just a new form of change. We all can check the data on our phones through the same apps that give us our QR codes of the of how many cases are being reported. So during the time when there were confirmed cases, and Peter, I can tell you, you could see a map of Shanghai and see like pinpoints of where there were confirmed positive cases on the map. I could see if there were like 5 confirmed cases down the street from my apartment. And I knew that like, I'm gonna social distance from people because that means it's nearby. So during that period, when there were a lot of positive cases popping up all over the city, people were definitely, you know, aware and keeping some distance. Now that's virtually down to 0 in the cities. Wuhan is still, you know, I think they're going to be a while coming out of it. But so now that we can all track that and see that the numbers are really, really low, it's been 0 for several days here. People are getting a little more comfortable that level of uncertainty is kind of gone away.
Well, that's interesting because the British government is actually about to launch an app which will give us that sort of information, but it sounds we're doing it much later than happened in Shanghai. But Douglas, thank you very much for your insights. That's been really useful for us to understanding how we might actually come out of lockdown in the coming months. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Appreciate it.